the volume all the way down on it.
Hey, that's a good enough intro, right? Hey guys.
Hey! Hi! Welcome to the Mess Up Show with Sarah, where I am a complete dumpster fire of a person. No, seriously. Welcome to Authors Chaos. We're still figuring this whole thing out. Can you tell?
All right. Let's just keep rolling. We'll roll with it.
Just go with it.
Right.
Oh, I'm Sarah.
And I am D.L. Golden. This is Authors Chaos, and we do want to preface here that we are not professional writers. We're kind of winging this as we go, and some of the things we say may not work for you, but if it helps out at all, then that's what we're here for. So,
for sure. We don't ever claim to be professionals, obviously, as you can tell by the intro of this podcast.
Right.
But we're so glad you're here, and today we're going to talk about being a fantasy writer, because I think that's what I am.
Right.
I mean, that's what I'd say that I am, kind of part-time when I'm not working.
Right.
So hold on, before we get started,
Yes.
I do have a question.
Yes.
When is your book release? Because it's coming like in a couple of days, right?
Yeah, the pre-order for Origins is up now for the ebook, so it can be purchased through the Kindle app. As of right now, you can get it and it will drop on May 1st. I am dropping the paperback on May 1st as well, so it'll start upload tonight and be ready to go by May 1st, hopefully, so it'll be purchasable then.
That is awesome, Daniel. So at the end of this, I'll have you send me the link to the Amazon ISBN number, and we'll put it in the YouTube video and in the podcast. That way people can order straight from there. We are so excited for you, Daniel, and I know that like your cover is amazing and your story is amazing, and I can't wait to have my friends read it. So I guess I'll start with the first question of like, how did you get into fantasy writing? Like, what was your inspiration to writing fantasy?
Well, and let me start by saying, when we talk about fantasy, we're not just talking about, when I talk about fantasy, as a fantasy writer, I'm not just talking about high fantasy when we're talking like medieval, Lord of the Rings style, magic, stuff like that. The genre of fantasy that I write is more in tune with the fantasy that stories like Naruto or Dragon Ball fall into. They are fantasy stories, but they're a different type of fantasy story. And those are the things that really inspired me. I am not a huge avid reader of long books. I've gotten more into that as an adult, but as a kid, as a teenager growing up, it was always manga and anime that really drove stories home for me. And so you'll probably notice in my story Origins, a lot of that is drawn from ideas of anime and manga that I have read. It's very heavily inspired, I feel like.
Okay. That makes sense.
So for you, do you draw more from the high fantasy side of that pot then?
Yes. So where you weren't really into reading, like, I don't want to say deep books, because manga can have very deep, like it can have very deep storylines and very deep things that it deals with. So I want to be very careful about how I say that, because I don't ever want to make anyone feel like what they read is not good enough, because I think everybody should be able to read what they want.
Right.
I will preface that. I was the kid, though, that read a lot of, I read Lord of the Rings. I read the Chronicles of Narnia. Like I read, and I'll stick with Lord of the Rings because it's kind of the basis for the adventure part of my story. So I like the fantasy adventure trope of like having to travel somewhere, right? Of like creating the world where they're living and stuff like that. So for me, yes, high fantasy is definitely kind of where Execration of Autumn definitely resides, and where the rest of the others will. I have written fantasy of like, not necessarily with castles and elves or whatever. Like I've written fantasy of like werewolves and vampires, because those qualify as a fantasy realm, or a monster fiction is what I've also heard it called. But those are the stories that I was super into. So I read Stephanie Meyer's, all of her New Moon Twilight books. I just read a lot. I read a lot of romance later in high school and into college, Christian romance, and then got into some other things as life went on. But I definitely had moments where, like, jumping between those two, high fantasy is where my heart is, just because of the
Hmm.
adventure and the fighting parts of it.
Yeah. Yeah, I can definitely understand that. I think a lot of what people find as fantasy, when you think fantasy, you often think those high fantasy Lord of the Rings style stories,
Right.
and I think a lot of people just don't tend to consider that it's a much broader category than
Right.
just that stuff, and
Well,
so that makes a
like
difference.
our sister-in-law JC Bryce, who she's releasing her second book here
Hmm.
fairly soon. Hers is fantasy, but it's a different type of fantasy,
Hmm.
right? Like
Yeah.
Architecture of Anarchy is definitely a different fantasy than yours, and it's not the same as mine at all, but we're all three fantasy writers.
Right.
So it's crazy how fantasy kind of encompasses
Yeah, it's a much bigger
encompasses all
umbrella.
of that.
Yeah.
Right, for sure, for sure. What was it like getting into creating your world and your characters? Like, did was there a method to the way that you got into that?
Um, Creating my world really stemmed from places that I had seen or been in real life. Those things that I'll go somewhere, like I remember being in Monarch Pass in Colorado and standing
Hmm.
on top of a mountain and looking out over that mountain range and thinking, "Oh, I love this for the introductory scene for my story," and that's really where it all took off from. But constructing a world, the world didn't come to me before the characters did, if that makes sense.
Hmm. Yeah.
The
Oh, for
characters
sure.
and their motivations came first, and okay, I knew he was gonna start out on this mountain, but where did he go from there? Was more of a was more of a sci thing than a, oh, I want my map to be shaped like this, and he'll travel this way
Right.
because of it. If that makes any sense.
Oh, that makes complete sense. I am a big, because of the creative writing classes that I've taken. I break down my characters before I do anything else.
Hmm.
So I know the basic plot of my stories and the overarching plot of the four stories, and then I have my characters and I break down their personalities and, like, where they fit in, and
Hmm.
then let them basically tell me the world. So I let them describe, okay, the tree, like when we stepped through this, it smelled like such and such. Or we crossed over this pass and saw the river and the castle.
Right.
It's all from their perspective. So, which
Right.
sounds insane.
No, and I equate it a lot to do you remember the old Command and Conquer games?
Yes.
You would start out in this little patch of land that is surrounded by fog or blackness, and as you move out, that world expands before you. And I
Hmm.
equate it a lot like that. I didn't
Oh,
really
yeah.
have an idea of, oh, this is this giant continent that they're on, and this is going to have to be placed here, and this is going to have to be placed here. I
Right.
said, okay, Sai is looking out in this direction. What direction? What is going to be on that path ahead of him? And so
Right.
that's where it
Right.
spreads out. As he travels through the world, then the world became more clear to me, if that makes sense.
Gotcha. Oh, that makes complete sense. For me, it was, I knew in my first scene where she was sitting when, like, the first thing that, like, pops off everything happened. And I knew basics of what I wanted, like, the Fey realm that she's going into to be like.
Hmm.
Obviously, there's magic. There's things that have magic that's unexplainable.
Yeah.
Um, but I didn't know until I got further into the story how in depth my world was going to become, like, how integral certain areas were going to be, if that makes
Hmm.
sense.
Yeah.
So it was a fun thing for me to like, once my characters are kind of not set in stone, because you want them to grow, right? Like
Right.
that's the point of
Hmm.
the book, is to follow their growth. Once I knew kind of where I wanted them to grow to, watching kind of as like this above the story thing, watching where they walked through and the things that happen in certain areas was really legit to like see how in Cora's anger in one scene, this area that she's standing in changes,
Hmm.
and how she sees it through the lens of anger is totally different, because she's not seeing it with clear eyes, right? She's seeing it through the red lens of like, I am ready to fight, like I'm ready to fight. It
Hmm.
changes how you see things. So creating the world through the lens of feelings and characters was fun, and it is fun, like cuz I'm still in the throes of it, right? But like getting to create it with these characters in mind of like, okay, this is how she feels, this is where this fits into the world and where it fits into the scene was crazy.
Yeah. And I had mentioned some real world analogs that I had used as inspiration in my story. Do you have any places that you have been or seen that have inspired what you've created?
Yes. So I was sitting in my backyard, and you know how my backyard is, I think. We have
Hmm.
a chain link fence, and right behind our house is an area. We live in town, but it's an area that's not developed. So it's all trees and undergrowth, and like you can't really walk through it because it's wild. And as it was a fall day and the leaves were changing, and there were lots of oranges and reds out there. And I just looked out there and I was like, well, that's where a Fey realm would butt up to the human realm, right? Like where the woods meets civilization. That's where it's at. So that was a thing. And then we have a trail system called Wildcat Glades that's close to us. And there's cliffs that the trail goes along and it comes out and you can see the river and all that jazz. And there's one vista where you stand out and you can look down the river off to the right and you can look down the river to the left. And we were walking probably a few days after I started the book, and I knew that vista, like the colors of the trees and the way that it was set up, was going to be integral in part of that adventure
Hmm.
of her like seeing the kingdom for the first time as a human who's literally never seen a real castle, right? Like what would that feeling be of looking out over? And I think it would be just as breathtaking as when I step to that cliff edge and look out and see, like, we don't live in like a super popular part of the United States, right? Like we're
Right.
flyover states for certain. Like we're flyover states. But this is an area that like I step out there and I'm like, this is creation, right? This is what I have wonder and awe in. And
Hmm.
it was something that I wanted her to like actively have wonder in stepping out and seeing that castle for the first time, and like the movement of her heart to see that. So yes, there are real world places that I've been to that I've used in the adventure sections of my book, and I have a whole Pinterest board of just New Zealand,
Right.
because that's where
Right.
Lord of the Rings was filmed, and it's gorgeous. And the Alps, because who doesn't like the Swiss Alps? So
Right. That's fair. Yeah, I think that a lot of times real world analog places like that tend to just morph them in your mind into what
Mhm.
you want them to be when you write them down.
Right.
Just pictures of or seeing cherry blossom trees, for example, sprouted into my mind of creating a forest of cherry blossom trees that they end up visiting
Mhm.
later on in the story, and that became a really integral part of the story. And I think it's really fascinating that stuff comes out of just those little minute details, just staring out into the real world and seeing something that you can turn into
Right.
real magic is amazing to me.
Right, right, right. It's was there ever a moment in writing Origins where you were like creating the world and you were describing the cherry blossom forest and you just stopped for a minute and you're like, "Whoa, wait. Like I just created that thing. Like I created it. Someone's going to love it." Was there ever a moment where you did that?
Yeah, I liked when I when I came up with the idea for the Sequoia forest. They travel through a part of the forest with these massive trees, and I I had read stories of how sequoia seeds are teeny tiny little things. They're itty bitty,
Mhm.
and um, when you shake a sequoia pine cone, they tend to dump these little seeds out on the ground, and those seeds can grow into these 100-foot tall, just behemoths of trees.
Oh yeah.
And I remember thinking, I want to turn that into an entire forest. And all of that stemmed out from the line that one of my characters says at one point. He says, "Yeah, these little seeds can grow into these great things." And Sai thinks, "Oh, yeah, that's really poignant. He's saying that I could grow into these." And he turns and says, "Yeah, but most of them just die on the floor because they're trash." And I'm like, I love that integral part that says, okay, here was the thought of a seed that he's going to have in his hand, and I turn that into an entire forest. I thought that was really
Right.
something special. And I think people will like that.
Right. I because I'm still writing.
Right.
There's so much that I have written that like last night I couldn't like I sat down and I just couldn't, right? Like I knew my brain was just not in it. And
Hmm.
I wanted to write, but like we talked about, there comes a point when like you're forcing it and the story isn't very good.
Yeah.
So I stopped and Davey asked me something about the castle. So the castle is very important to me. Our nephew, Ollie Jobus, helped me create the castle. Like he sat down with me and I picked his brain for things that as a kid he would be excited to see in a castle. So there was a lot of stuff that like had to be okay, buddy. Like let's rethink this. Like this
Right.
doesn't make sense. But there was some other stuff that like because he thinks so outside the box, I was like, yeah, yeah, it could look like that. Like, why couldn't a gate be made out of diamond? Like, they're magical. Why couldn't they make a gate out of diamond?
Right.
So the kind of yesterday, Davey had asked me about the castle, and I told him something that Ollie had told me, and I literally stopped for a second. I was like, Ollie and I created a place where people live. Like
Right.
people go there to like they go there to worship, they go there to deal with like the political dealings. I say political or the king and queen things to do with the hierarchy of the autumn court. It is the centerpiece of this realm. And it was just one of those moments last night where I was like, someone is going to love what Ollie and I poured into this thing. And they're going to see it in their mind's eye when they're reading the story. And it
Right.
was just one of those moments where I was like, okay, cool. Like, cool. I could really be doing this thing, right? Like I could really be creating something that people genuinely love. Like I love Lord of the Rings, right?
Right.
So it was a crazy moment of like, okay, yeah, yeah, this is a thing. Okay.
Yeah. I get see where you're coming from with that.
um so how did you said earlier that you don't worry about like, oh, this is how my map is shaped or whatever.
Right.
So when it did come down, because I know you have a map
Yes. Yeah.
in your book, I know you have a map. um when it came to creating the layout, because you eventually did have to have something that showed like this is
Yeah.
how the world's laid out.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
When it
Yeah.
came to that, like was it difficult to come up with like descriptions of these places or where exactly they live in the world?
Well, the when I finally had to come up with the map, it was okay. I started at the beginning of the story, and where was my first location? I said, okay, it's this tallest mountaintop in this mountain range that we see. And then I said, okay, side travels down and he goes to this city. So I mapped from there across and found where I thought, okay, what is walking distance from this mountainside? Then I kind of just spiraled out from there and said, okay, what are all the places I described? What are all the places I said needed to be there? There are places that I said were small fishing villages at the far northern
Right.
end of the continent. And I'm like, okay, so that's going to plop down at the far north side of this island,
Right.
which really was just me going on Inkarnate and drawing a almost bean shaped island and
Right.
then sprawling out in different places and saying, okay, what can I do to set these locations out away from each other in a way that makes sense? And my map at the end of the day is the locations are very hodgepodge together, and there's a reason for that. As you get further in the story, you'll realize, but there are so many diverse locations like the Silene Badlands, which are a desert that they end up in, or the Sequoia Forest outside of Alara that they have to visit, or the Cherry Blossom Forest that they end up in. And these places are all disparate and spread apart from each other, but
Hmm.
they travel through these warp gates to get to each one of them. And so navigating to those locations was not a super big issue.
Right.
So I think it will be more of a problem come the second book because of plans that I have going forward. But as it stands, I really had an idea of what cities and things I wanted first and then designed the continent and locations afterward,
Right.
if that makes sense.
Okay. Yeah, that makes complete sense. Also, shout out to Incarnate. If you do not have a map creating thing in your world, I would definitely suggest it. I
Right?
have used it. I think JC Bryce used it for hers.
Mm-hmm.
Then you used it like so we have supported Incarnate. It is totally worth it. You can use
Mm-hmm.
it for your D&D campaigns. Shameless plug. That's
Well,
what we use to make our maps.
and the thing you have to be careful of with certain services is that all of their stuff is not publicly licensed. So if
Right.
you go off and make a map on a different service and you're not sure if you have full licensing with it, you cannot place it
Right.
in your book. With
Exactly.
Incarnate, when you pay for the license, they allow you to have full license over those objects
Oh,
that
for
you've placed
sure.
in. So that's really
For
nice and
sure.
a lot safer.
It's
So.
I'm really glad I found it on Google and told Elia about it
Right.
or
It
JC Bryce about it.
it has really worked well for creating maps, and I'll use it again because I bought it's just like a year subscription or something for twenty
Yeah.
four
Hmm.
dollars.
So
Really worth it, I
there's our
think.
shameless plug.
Right? Yeah.
There's our shameless
Exactly.
plug for Incarnate.
You're welcome.
But I so and I keep saying this, I'm in the throes of it, right?
Hmm.
So like I know eventually I'm gonna have to come up with like a map to show like where the line is for the realm crossover.
Yeah.
Cause it's gonna have to be like their backyard, then this like realm is just here.
Right.
Magic. Magic. But I don't have a lot of cities outside of the castle because of the things that have been happening.
Hmm.
A lot of my cities are decimated. So they don't even stop at any of what would be cities in the Autumn Court at this point in the book
Yeah.
because they're trying very hard to just get they're trying to get to the castle.
Right.
But I know in the next couple of books, there's going to be things where I'm going to have to have more description of like things that they see. She's very naive when they go to the castle. All she knows is that there's been battles, people have died, and it's alluded to in these first chapters that I've written, but it's about to get more real
Mm-hmm.
that a lot of sacrifice has happened over these so many thousand years that they've been trying to find her.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that that's coming up in the next couple of chapters, where they're going to be like, hey, the amount of death that has happened is astronomical,
Mm-hmm.
and she's going to have to come to terms with the fact that, like, all of these people, all of this bloodshed has been in order for her to make it to this place. So I am eventually going to have to get to where I'm like laying out decimated cities and fringe survivors who are just out, not able to move freely because of the things that have been happening, but who are still supporting the Autumn Court and the things that are happening in the Autumn Court. So just getting, I'm not to that point yet, right? Like
Yeah.
I'm just not there yet.
So I guess a question would be, with your courts, are they acting like countries or states where they butt up against territory lines with other places? And are you going to design the entire continent that all of these courts sit in? Or are you going to design just the Autumn Court for this book and
for
then
this
later on expand it?
for this book, I'm just focusing on the Autumn Court.
Mm-hmm.
And she she found something out in the last couple of chapters that changed the way that I viewed the courts.
Mm-hmm.
So when you said like countries that butt up together, states that butt up together, I would definitely say that. However, because they are realms, they also have borders that border with human realms. So you could enter the winter court at a certain area, cross over in the autumn, and come out at a different human realm on this side of the autumn court, if that makes sense.
Okay. No, I gotcha.
But each book is going to focus on those courts. So this first book is about the autumn court, so I'm mainly focused on what's going on with like her finding out everything that she's found out so far and how it fits into the overall arc of her being Lilac Cursebreaker.
Yeah.
So what it's going to end up coming down to is like creating the autumn court map, and then in the next book showing like the autumn court where it's connected to the winter court, and then the
Mm-hmm.
third book will end up having to be both of those and then connect in the spring court, and then connecting all three of those for the fourth book, which will be about the summer court. So it's, I think it's going to be one of those things where like I was actually talking to Davey about this last night. I think I'm going to do it like it's a ripped map.
Mm-hmm.
So you get pieces of it in
Yeah.
each book. So you're going to start out with like the very jagged edge
Yeah.
autumn court, and then you'll get another couple of jagged edged piece for the winter. And I think that just kind of, once it's all together, it will make sense. But like prior to that, it's all ripped and torn and like don't understand how they fit together, if that makes sense. So
Yeah.
like a very old ripped map. And that's kind of where I'm at in how much do I share
Right.
about the other courts in this first book. Now she has again some information that is necessary to this first book because it's going to dictate the way like the next couple of books go. But
Mm-hmm.
I want to focus on like the area of the autumn court and the things that have been going on there, because that's who she's tied to at the moment,
Yeah.
and it will kick over to the winter court later. So at the end of the day, I'm gonna have to create the autumn court map. I'm gonna have to
Right.
do it, right? Like I'm gonna have to sit down and be like, okay, this is where the citadel sits comparatively to everything else and to the winter court. But I'm not going to have to get into the other court designs until I get into the other books. So, which is kind of nice to sequester it off that way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I gotcha. No, in mine, I obviously put down all the places they visit or all the places that are mentioned on the map. But coming into the second book, I'm automatically in a place that is not explored very much in the first map, and so that map is going
Right.
to have to expand. And I knew that, and I figured I would put more than one map location in
Right, for
the
sure.
second because there'll be expanded locations and things
Mm-hmm.
like that. I need people to be able to know where they're at.
Right.
And I think a map helps a lot in doing that because a picture is
Yes.
worth 1,000 words no matter how you cut it.
Right.
So
Right.
I
Right.
would agree there.
So you said something earlier that you kind of see it like a video game. So
Hmm.
kind of like and I think of like God of War,
Hmm.
where your map is very like it's black except for where you've walked,
Yeah,
and
exactly.
or like Assassin's Creed, because I play a lot of Assassin's Creed. Until you get up high and do the action,
Yeah.
you have no idea what's around you for exploration until
Hmm.
you do that thing. And I think that's kind of where a lot of authors sit, is in this dark place until they explore
Yeah,
some
until they
things
start
and it
shedding light
comes
on
to
it.
them.
Yeah.
Right, for
I,
sure.
I just don't think there's much other way to do it unless you're just like, oh, the continent or the place where they're at is the main focus.
Right.
Um, I know in the Sword Art light novels, he explains Aincrad as the original, as the thing. He says it's a floating island of steel and stone, or iron and stone, and he explains all
Hmm.
this stuff because that is the main focus of the story.
Right.
But for a place that is more character driven than location driven, I think you have to start at your character perspective level and work your way out from there.
Out. Right.
So,
For sure. For sure. Did you have anything else? Any questions or anything else for me?
um, the only thing I could think of is what has been your favorite place to create inside of your world so far?
Well, I did just talk about the castle.
Right?
Um, and I can't even move past how excited I am for this dadgum castle. But there is an observatory at this castle
Hmm.
that, if I had all of the money in the world, I would have this observatory. Like, it is, I can, and even just sitting here, like every time I blink, I can see it. It is quintessentially has the big telescope and has the big open windowed ceiling, but one whole side of the dome is actually painted like the night sky. And it, because it's magic, when the dome shifts for the telescope, it shifts with the night sky. So
Hmm.
it shifts the stars. So you're still seeing the stars even if you're not looking outside. But all down around the base of the dome is just bookshelves of scrolls and books and things of that nature. And it's mahogany and cherry woods and velvety drapes and just,
Yeah.
like the quintessential, like, because it is where my clerics live, it is the quintessential, like, heartbeat of all of the things she has to learn. And as I was creating it, like, there's a trap door they have to enter. Like, it's kind of reminds me of like a lighthouse. So when you enter a lighthouse, it spirals all the way up. There's no rooms. Then you walk out. Well, this instead is just a floor. You have a trap door to enter. And my character even says, she goes, it is very unladylike to enter a trap door because there's like no graceful way to enter, right?
Hmm.
But she enters sitting down and she looks up and she sees that mosaic on that side of the dome, and it takes her breath away. And it was literally like, even describing it now, I kind of want to cry. I'm so excited about it. Like, but it is my favorite place, that like inside of the castle is the observatory. And I think because it's the place where like she is getting to unlock a whole bunch of information she never knew, like about her parents and her past, and it's tied to so many answers to so many things. So definitely the observatory is my favorite. What
You
about you? What's your favorite?
You are going to love the Grand Library of the Citadel then. It sounds very similar. But it reminds me, it is this large building right at the center of the Citadel, and it has this gleaming golden roof that is
Hmm.
domed over the top. And so when they enter in, they enter through these stained glass doors, and it's just wall to wall books, and they're every
Oh, wow.
tome that the Citadel has ever collected. hidden there in the walls, and scribes buzz from side to side looking through these tomes and studying them. And at the far end, there's a staircase that leads up to a U-shaped walkway, and then
Oh.
a raising platform at the center, which elevates into that dome. And that's where like the
Hmm.
trial of the tome takes place for Sai. And
Okay.
um, it's he gets up to the top of this golden dome, and it's actually see-through from the inside, but from the outside, it's not. And he marvels at the fact that it's this beautiful thing, but he's come here to basically die. And
Oof.
it is my absolute favorite place that I built up. The stained glass doors on the front and the banners with the golden dragons. I love everything about it. Um,
Right.
it was the place that appeared in my mind as the Citadel itself, and the city sprouted out from there.
Right.
And
Right.
so it was my favorite place to visit, even though they are not there very long.
Often. Right.
Um, but it has been my absolute favorite place to design because it had the most architectural description to it, I think. So,
That's
other than
awesome.
that, the cherry blossom forest has been a favorite of mine. I love the idea of a cherry blossom tree, and I think that an
Hmm.
entire forest of it is just very poetic. So, I have a lot of places, but I also am a lot further along than than you have come, right? And I'm even expanding from that point now into the second book that I'm writing. So
Hmm.
it's been a trip creating all of that stuff, and I'm
Right.
excited to see how people react when they read all that.
I'm excited to get your book. Like,
Right,
I'm so stoked about it. I told Davey last night, I was like, I will dump all the money in all of like all of our books. Like, I will dump all of the money in having a copy of everybody's book. And Davey asked me, he goes, "Are you going to get Daniel to sign it?" And I said, "Yes."
see, I told Emily I got my first author's draft in, or just my first draft in the other day that was checking for errors and stuff. And I'm like, well, I could give this to Sarah. And she's like, you need to wait until you have the finalized thing so she's not reading through your error points that you have to fix before getting it set. So I have
Right?
a secondary draft supposed to be coming in tomorrow to make sure everything is
That's
perfect.
awesome.
And then I'll hit that publish button and we'll be good to go. So I have so
Ooh,
many
are you
people.
nervous?
Yeah, absolutely. I have had so many people say that they're going to purchase it, and I'm just like, don't do that. And I'm just I think it'll be good, and it's just one of those things. It's scary to put something that you've poured so much of your
Your
time
heart into.
into out into the world, because
Right.
people can be really harsh.
Oh
But
yeah.
I think that if you're not willing to accept that criticism, then growth can't occur. And so
I
you've got
agree.
to move past it.
I'm getting ready to send chapter 3 and 4 to my beta readers right now. And I messaged the group chat today and I was like, "Hey y'all, like are you let me know when you're ready for the next chapters." And they were both like, "We've been ready for 2 weeks." And I was like, "Oh,
Right.
okay. I'll send them to you." And they're like, "What are you waiting for?" And I'm like, all the things I don't know. I'll send it to
Right.
you." So when I get
It's
off here, I'm going to be sending those.
it is nerve-wracking, but I think if you are willing to move past that fear, then you can really grow as a writer and do good
Oh,
things, and
100%.
it's just what you have to
100%.
do. So,
All right.
I think
Well,
that's about it.
thank you guys for joining us. We appreciate it. Sorry for the hot mess intro that we're going to have on here.
It'll be
If
fine.
you know me, you just know that's who I am as a person, so it's fine. It's great.
Completely realize. Well, it's been good talking to you guys. Good
It's
talking to
been
you,
good to
Sarah.
talk to you, Daniel. I hope that your release goes well, and I hope you get a lot of sales.
Yeah, so look out for Origins on Monday. Can't
And
believe
I
it's
will
that
put the
close now.
links. I'll put the links in the description, and that way you guys can purchase it. We appreciate you guys.
Thank you. Bye.